Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I want to talk about reboots. Obviously, that's been a conversation I've, made a few videos talking about, but obviously there's a whole conversation of obviously now, and, nowadays, like, for a lot of people, they feel like everyone kind of goes for the reboots because, an established property is a lot easier to kind of get off the ground than a property that you have to come up with a new IP and all that. But obviously, and a lot of people are like, oh, don't like reboots and stuff like that. Obviously, once again, this is the conversation I had before, but for today's video, I just want to kind of particularly focus on two particular reboots that I really liked, and obviously their situations are a little different. Those reboots being the Charmed reboot and obviously Spider-Man, specifically Spider-Man in the MCU. I'll kind of break them down one by one. Well, first of all, with Charmed, I feel, well, if you listen to any of my reviews, you know how much I gush over the reboot. I really, really like it, and I am someone who was a fan of the original show. Because obviously, I've talked about this before, it's syndicated on TNT. It still currently syndicates on TNT, but back then it was like 8 and 9 in the morning and then like 4 and 5 in the afternoon. There'd be a lot of occasions where I'd end up skipping school and just staying home, and that'd be one of the things I'd watch in the morning. But like I said, I'm a big fan of the original show, so there's that. But and like, this is something that, like, once again, if you've heard my reviews, you know how much I keep saying this over and over again. But what I like about the Charmed reboot is the fact is they take a lot of stuff from the original show and remix it in very interesting ways. Like, obviously, it's not like a beat for beat remix. There's similarities, but even with some of those similarities, it might be similar plot lines, but they go about things in different directions. And like I said, remix it. And so, like, a great example of this would be the whole half-sister storyline. Obviously, in the original show, they end up finding out they had a half-sister named Paige. In this reboot, Maggie and Mel find out they have a half-sister named Macy. Now, why I say that's interesting is because obviously in the original storyline, in the original show, that was a storyline created out of circumstances. Now, I'm not going to go down that whole, like, diving into like the drama behind all that, because I'm not interested in that. But it's like that was a plot point created out of circumstances. In the reboot, right from the get-go, they jumped to that, which I immediately, this was something I had picked up from the trailers, not even just the first episode, but the trailers. I was like, holy crap, they're completely not even like, well, I could once again, why would you make that a like storyline thing? Because it's like that was a storyline created out of circumstances. So it's like, why just go through all that? Why don't we just take that plot point and just make that kind of how the show starts? And I thought that was kind of interesting. And if you're caught up with Charmed, because I don't want to spoil it, because there are some interesting twists to the show, especially if you're a fan of the original show, that I think is kind of interesting. Even on that half-sister storyline with Macy, there's a lot of like remixing to that whole circumstance. It's like lanes they didn't go down with the whole Paige circumstance. But I think it's kind of interesting how they kind of make that, half-sibling storyline in their own way. So that's kind of an example, and there's many other different examples of that. But like I said, there's a lot of similarities. Like I said, they remix, and I just think it's a really, really, really good reboot. And I think the reason why it probably works as a reboot too is because it is a TV show. Because, and what I mean by that is, like, I feel like movie reboots, you might find yourself kind of following the same pattern. At least with a TV show, you had the freedom to kind of flex and just kind of work things out, kind of build things up to kind of shift them. Whereas a movie, you're allocated a certain amount of time. So it's like you do a little, because finding that perfect balance of doing something familiar while also doing something new, I feel like you have more freedom to do that in a TV show. That's how I feel about it. So, because Charmed is one of the few, like, Charmed and Spider-Man are some of the few things that are in my life that that have been rebooted in my lifetime, in the sense that I'm a big fan of. Like, whereas like there's like, your horror movies, whether it be like your Halloweens, your Friday the 13th, or it's like your Nightmare on Elm Street, which those had like more modernized one-off reboots that whether or not that ever becomes, you get what I'm trying to say. Whereas like Texas Chainsaw Massacre gets like rebooted every couple years and stuff like that. So like those are franchises I'm not like the biggest fan of. So so for some people it's like, oh, those reboots kind of bother them, but for them it's like, for me, well, because I also have to bring up the conversation of like remakes versus reboots. That's always still something that's kind of a sticky area for me, because I think reboot is revitalizing new life into a franchise, whereas a remake is supposed to be, but then like remakes can be reboots and reboots can be remakes, so it gets a little tricky. Like, it's something I need to really look into, what is the exact definition of. But like I said, reboots are breathing new life, whereas a remake seems like it might be a shot for shot. Because The Lion King is not considered a reboot; it's considered a remake. But then you think about like Maleficent, the movie Maleficent would be a reboot of like Sleeping Beauty rather than a remake, because they do something different. So that's why I look at Charmed as the example in my head is like comparing the original, well, the British Being Human versus the North American adaptation. Like that's how, you know, I kind of look at it in my head, where they're similar, but at the same time they diverge heavily in certain aspects. Like, you know, because that's why I won't even pick like, oh, which one do you like? Do you like the original more? Do you like the reboot? It's like, I feel like I might like the reboot more, but to be fair, it has been a couple years since I've sat down and watched any of the original, but it's still near and dear to my heart. So that's why I'll treat it kind of like how I do Being Human. I love the British Being Human, and I also love the North American adaptation, because they're different enough that you don't have, I compare and contrast them because I think it's interesting. So I'm like, oh, this is something from the original show they took, and like I said, they remixed it and kind of did their own thing with it. So that's why, like, I kind of look at them as separate things, you know, rather than just like trying to like, oh, it's like, oh, the original did this better or something like that. It's like, no, the reboot took this thing from the original and they did their own thing with it. So that's why I don't really compare and contrast them, because it's doing its own thing in certain regards, in many regards actually. So there's that side of things, and then obviously there's the whole conversation about Spider-Man. Obviously, like, Spider-Man is my favorite superhero. I've said it countless times, and even, you know, especially this iteration, because I think it's kind of sad because Tom Holland's Spider-Man has the kind of unfair advantage of being in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, whereas every other, you know, whether it be Tobey Maguire, whether it be Andrew Garfield, they were kind of isolated in their own stories, which obviously being part of the MCU has its pros and cons, because for some people, because it's so heavy into the MCU, because Spider-Man's story is so intertwined with everyone else's, his story is so entangled with the MCU that that's kind of a deterrent for a lot of people. I don't look at it as a deterrent. I look at it as awesome. But for some people who feel like Spider-Man doesn't really have a chance to stand on his own, which I feel like you can make an argument with that. Far From Home, some people will probably make the argument like it's still too in-depth into the MCU because it's still tied to Tony's story in many different regards. It's still tied to the MCU. It's not even really Spider-Man's story, even though it is, but you can make the argument it's a continuation of Tony's legacy. So that's a whole conversation in itself. But once again, I always talk about it. I'm extremely biased when it comes to Spider-Man. So that's why, like, Far From Home is currently my favorite MCU movie. I love the MCU movies, but it's always, Spider-Man is always going to have a leg up over everyone else, just because I grew up watching Spider-Man. And that's why I think Spider-Man's an interesting position for me too when it comes to the whole reboot, because Spider-Man has been rebooted multiple times over the course of my life. Now, not just comic book wise, because obviously I'm not the biggest comic book person, but just even cartoon wise, there have been so many, like, iterations of Spider-Man in cartoon and animated form over the years, TV-wise, that it's like, you know, it getting rebooted again. Like, cause some people are like, whoa, it went from, you know, like I said, was it 6 years in between Spider-Man 3 and the Amazing Spider-Man 1, and from Amazing Spider-Man 2 to Spider-Man popping up in Civil War was 2 years, technically 3 years if you want to go from Spider-Man to Spider-Man, being from Amazing Spider-Man 2 to Homecoming, regardless. Some people are like, oh, that's a quick turnaround. They don't like that, you know, Spider-Man gets regardless. I'm always up for Spider-Man no matter what you end up doing, even if for whatever reason, and I'm not saying they should do this, and I hope they never do, but it's like, obviously they decide to reboot Spider-Man, which obviously you can make the argument, well, I mean, I guess technically you could, it wouldn't even be a reboot. I was about to say if, like, they went down to Miles Morales angle in the MCU, kind of like they're going down that angle on the Sony side of things with Into the Spider-Verse, which obviously, you know, most recently got a sequel announced, which I'm super excited about that to see what they end up doing with that. But, like, these two properties are in a very interesting position because, like, I can't say I'm like any other property that I'm that familiar with that's like that, because you can't even say Doctor Who because I've never watched the original Doctor Who, so there's not even that charmed comparison to make in that regard. Like I said, it's, you know, it's just very interesting circumstances of me being like, oh, reboots, they're really good. I mean, probably, like, the only other one I can think of now off the top of my head would be It. I've yet to see Chapter 2, but, like, I remember seeing the original It many years ago, and obviously I saw the 2017 remake that I really liked, but it puts itself in that interesting category of, like, obviously the original It doesn't hold that much of a, I still liked it, but it doesn't hold that special place in my heart like the original Charms show does. And once again, Spider-Man's always had a special place in my heart, so that puts these two, like, things in kind of a different category all on their own, in comparison to most people who might feel like, oh, this is something I cherish and you reboot it. Like, I haven't had that yet. Obviously there's been, and a property I've talked about a while back was like The Crow, because apparently that's been something people have been trying to like reboot for a while now, which I'd be all keen to see a Crow reboot. I've made it clear recently, I can't remember what the circumstances were, but I think I was commenting on something where I was like, I prefer it to be in a TV show, because I really like the TV show. And once again, obviously TV shows are my favorite form to kind of, well, form of media, just because you get, once again, you get to flex out, you get to build stuff up, whereas a movie, you're kind of allocated to kind of squeezing certain things into a certain amount of time, whereas I feel like you can nicely build up an arc over the course of the TV show, you know, so, but that's just me. If you could take anything away from this video, like if you are a fan of the original Charmed and you've never seen the reboot, I highly recommend you do. I mean, I am in that bubble, and that's something I gotta kind of break myself out of, is because just because I really like, borderline love something, doesn't mean everyone else feels that way. Because I think I've seen some people be not too keen on the Charmed reboot, which I kind of get my nerdy bag, like, what, are you crazy? Because I heard, I can't remember where I read it, but somewhere referred to season 1 of the Charmed reboot as lackluster. I was like, are you out of your damn mind? Season 1 was great on so many levels. Season 2 is already shaping up to be so great too. So that's why I'm like, how could you even say that? Like, someone even referred to it as like charmless at one point. I was like, you know, but then like, I had to rein myself in and be like, you know what? People are entitled to their opinion. I feel the way I feel about it. So who am I to judge someone else for their opinion? Like, maybe someone else who's a big fan of the original show is like, this doesn't have to feel. Like, to me, it does in so many levels. I get giddy over the show. Once again, I don't, like, you listen to any of my reviews, I get so damn giddy about this show. I don't know why. It's just like, it's so neat, and I just love the direction they're taking stuff. Like I said, you can see original stuff. You're like, oh, like, I've talked about this for a little while now. They're basically setting up the Piper and Leo storyline. They're basically taking that, and where they're heading it currently in the show, they're kind of taking that and they're remixing it in a very, very interesting way. I'm like, they didn't do this. The reboot is doing something. I was like, oh, that the original didn't do that. So it's neat, because it's kind of, you know, the word that kind of gets kind of tackled with like reboots or remakes is reimaginings, and this is a very, very good reboot, remake, or more so reboot or reimagining is kind of what I have to say. So, you know, once again, like I said, I like how I compare the Being Humans. They're both great in my mind, you know. So the same thing applies to the original Charmed OG, and obviously Charmed 2018, you know. So regardless, I've babbled on enough. In the comments down below, let me know some of your thoughts. Obviously, like, I'd like to kind of continue the conversation of reboots. Some of your favorite reboots, some of your least favorite reboots. You know, obviously, this is an interesting conversation to have. Obviously, the most recent thing being like the Terminator situation, obviously not being a big success. You know, what that means for a lot of movies being rebooted, which once again, that, you know, that's movies versus TV shows, because they can do a little differently with TV shows. I'd love to get to know your opinions about this. I said, this is something I've brought up before, but I feel like I'm kind of trying to tackle this conversation from a different angle, because now I kind of have even more of a different perspective now that, you know, reboot / remake have a bigger impact because of these two particular properties, that being Charmed and Spider-Man, are kind of great examples, in my opinion, of great reboots, which a lot of people are like, oh, once again, people are kind of mixed on reboots just because maybe there's some that they do like, but more often than not, there's some that they don't like. So let me know. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.